I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I refused to let them name my child. They dragged me across the town square at noon, rope biting bone, dust filling my mouth while men laughed and called it law. They said I was barren, cursed, less than a woman. And when my boy cried out, they pointed to the mark on his neck and named him a beast. I could have let go. I didn't. That was the moment the town chose to break me, and the moment everything else began to crack. By nightfall, the rope would be cut. By winter's end, a courtroom would learn a truth it had buried. And by spring, 3 lives would walk away from a place that only knew how to drag. But standing there on my knees, I didn't know any of that yet. I only knew one thing. The rope was new, and someone had tied it carefully. Stay with this story to the very end. Subscribe for more Western love stories. And tell me, what city are you watching from? The rope bit into Clara's wrists before the crowd even finished gathering. One hard jerk and her boots skidded across the packed earth of the town square. Dust leapt up and clung to the wet places on her palms where the skin had already split. The horse did not look back. Neither did the man holding the reins. "Walk," her husband said, loud enough for every porch rail and every open window. "Or I'll let the mare teach you." Clara tried. Her knees buckled anyway. The rope yanked her forward, and her dress tore at the hem, cloth grinding into gravel. A laugh cracked through the air, then another, thin and mean, like the town had been waiting all week for something to jeer at. A woman in a shawl covered a child's eyes. A gambler leaned on a post and spat. Men shifted to clear a path as if they were making room for a parade. "Infertile," her husband called, swinging the word like a whip. "A barren wife, no son, no purpose." Clara's teeth clicked once, hard. She tried to push up, but the rope pulled her sideways. Her forearm scraped raw. She swallowed the sound that wanted to break out of her throat. I learned to hold pain in my teeth. A small body jerked against someone's grip at the edge of the circle. "Mama!" the voice cried, high, sharp, half-choked with panic. Jonah. He lunged again, little boots digging in the dirt, and the man holding him tightened his arm like a clamp. "Keep that thing back," someone muttered. A hand tore at Jonah's collar, yanking him up by the cloth to show his throat like proof. There, at the base of his neck, the mark flashed, dark against skin, like the shape of a claw in bruised ink. "Beast," a ranch hand said, too eager. "Look at him." The word moved fast. Beast. Curse. Devil's get. It passed through the crowd the way sickness does, quiet at first, then everywhere. Clara twisted, trying to reach him, but the rope snapped her back. Her wrists burned. Jonah's eyes locked on hers, wide and wet, and he stopped fighting long enough to breathe. "Don't," she rasped. Not to him, to herself, to the town, to God, if he was listening. Her husband jerked the reins again. "See?" he boomed. "She can't give me a child, so she steals one and brings a monster into my home." Clara's mouth filled with dust. She forced her chin up and stared at the faces nearest her. Some looked away. Some didn't. No one stepped forward. A church bell far off gave a single tired note, as if it had been bumped by wind. Somewhere a faint Christmas hymn drifted out of an open door, a line of melody swallowed by laughter. The sound didn't save her. It only reminded her what mercy was supposed to be. Another pull, another scrape. Clara's fingers dug into the ground, searching for purchase, and came up with nothing but grit. Then the crowd shifted in a different way, like an animal sensing a new thing entering the pen. A horse pushed through the outer ring, big, gray, winter-thick flecks of frost still clinging to its mane. The rider sat heavy in the saddle, coat dark with trail dust, shoulders wide enough to block the sky behind him. He didn't look at the faces. He looked at the rope. Gideon swung down before the horse fully stopped. His boots hit the dirt, solid and final. He crossed the space without hurry, but he didn't waste steps. Her husband sneered, drunk on attention. "You lost, woodsman. This here's family business." Gideon didn't answer. He reached his hand out. Not toward Clara, not yet. Toward the rope where it ran tight from her wrists to the saddle horn. An axe hung at his side, worn smooth at the grip. The mayor's mouth opened like he meant to speak. The deputy beside him shifted his weight, half ready, half afraid. Gideon still didn't look at them. Clara flinched as his shadow fell over her. She expected a kick. She expected a hand that grabbed too hard. Instead, a low voice, calm as cold water. "Hold still." Before her husband's lips could shape a new insult, Gideon lifted the axe. One clean swing. Steel met rope with a crack sharp as a gunshot. The rope snapped. The tension vanished so suddenly, Clara pitched forward and caught herself on trembling hands. For a heartbeat, the entire square went silent, as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Her husband's face turned the color of old brick. "What in hell?" Gideon stepped between him and Clara without even looking back. Broad shoulders, quiet stance. Not a threat shouted, just a line drawn. "No woman gets dragged like livestock," Gideon said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Not yours, not anyone's." The deputy's hand hovered near his belt. The mayor swallowed. Someone in the crowd muttered, "He's got no right." Clara's wrists throbbed. She wrapped one hand around the other, trying to stop the shaking. Jonah made a sound, small, broken, and Clara turned her head just enough to see him fighting the man's grip again, tears cutting clean tracks down his dusty cheeks. "Jonah," she breathed. Gideon moved first. He didn't charge the crowd. He walked straight toward the man holding the child, eyes level. The grip loosened without a word spoken. Jonah stumbled free and ran, straight into Clara's arms. Clara caught him hard. He was lighter than he should have been, ribs sharp under cloth. His hands clutched her dress like it was the only thing keeping him from falling into a river. "They said I'm—" Jonah began. "No," she cut in, voice raw. "You're Jonah. You hear me?" Jonah nodded once, fast. He pressed his forehead to her shoulder and shook. Her husband laughed, but there was fear under it now, the kind that shows when a man's show gets interrupted. "Fine," he spat. "Take her. Take the monster too. I'll have the law by sundown." Gideon didn't glance at him. He crouched beside Clara, careful. His hands hovered near her wrists, then stopped short. "Can you stand, ma'am?" he asked, as if she had a choice that mattered. Clara swallowed. Her knees felt hollow. She nodded anyway. Gideon offered his hand, not grabbing, not pulling. Waiting. Clara put her scraped palm into his. His grip closed around it steady and warm, and he helped her up in one smooth motion. The crowd parted as they moved. Gideon lifted his free hand, not to threaten, but to shield Clara's face from the staring. It was a small motion, It changed everything. I had forgotten what gentleness felt like. Her husband's voice followed them, loud, desperate to regain the square. "She's mine! You hear me? Mine!" The deputy stepped forward at last. "Gideon," he called, using the name like a warning. "Don't make this worse." Gideon didn't stop walking. "Tell him to unlearn cruelty," he said over his shoulder, "or learn consequences." They reached the infirmary, one room, chipped porch, a crooked sign that creaked in the wind. The doctor inside looked up, startled, then saw Clara's wrists and said nothing at all. She just reached for clean cloth. "Sit," the doctor ordered, voice clipped, hands already working. "Boy, here, by the stove." Jonah obeyed instantly, eyes darting to the door every time a boot scuffed outside. Clara lowered herself onto the edge of the cot, like her bones might break if she moved too fast. She kept her hands in her lap, fingers twisting, blood and dirt ground into the lines of her skin. Gideon shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. Heavy wool, smoke and pine on it. It sat there like armor. "You shouldn't have done that," Clara whispered. Her voice came out small. Gideon looked at her. Really looked. Past the torn hem. Past the bruises swelling along her forearms. Past the shame the town had tried to nail onto her. His eyes were dark, steady, and tired in a way that didn't beg for pity. "I already did," he said. Outside, a horse snorted. A shout rose, then another. Then the sharp scrape of boots on planks as men gathered again like they could rebuild the spectacle with louder voices. Clara's throat tightened. "He'll come," she said. "Tonight. He always does when I make him look weak." The doctor's hands paused for half a breath, then went back to tying the cloth. The deputy's shadow crossed the window once, then moved away. Gideon's jaw worked once. He didn't reach for his gun. He reached for a canteen. "Drink," he said. Clara drank. Water tasted like metal and life. Jonah stared at Gideon's coat around her shoulders, then at Gideon himself, as if trying to understand how a man could step into a square and stop a town. Gideon bent, picked something off the floor near Jonah's boot, a small object that had fallen when the boy ran. A brass button, worn smooth, stamped with a simple mark. A wolf's head, faint but unmistakable. Gideon's eyes narrowed. He turned the button once between his fingers. Clara noticed it, and her stomach dropped, though she didn't know why. Jonah's small hand shot out, snatching the button back. "It's mine," he said, voice trembling but firm. Gideon didn't fight him for it. He just watched Jonah tuck it inside his shirt like a secret. Outside, the shouting grew closer. Someone slammed a fist against the infirmary door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Open up," a man barked. "By order of the town." The doctor's face went pale. Jonah slid off the stool and pressed against Clara's knee, eyes wide. Gideon stood. He moved to the back wall where a few supplies hung. Flint kit, bandage roll, a short length of rope, a blanket. He packed with quick hands, as if he'd done this before and didn't intend to do it again. Clara's breath came shallow. "Where would we even go?" she whispered. Gideon turned back to her, and for the first time his voice softened by 1 degree. Not warmth, not romance, just certainty. "Out," he said, "before that door opens." He stepped close, not touching her, letting her choose. "Can you ride, ma'am, right now?" Clara nodded once. It cost her. Gideon saw it in the way her shoulders held too still, in the way she braced her jaw before she spoke. "I can ride," she said. I won't slow you. He didn't argue. He turned, lifted Jonah without ceremony, and set the boy on the bench by the stove long enough to knot a scarf around his neck with practiced fingers. Not tight, just enough. Then he handed the doctor a coin, more than the visit was worth, and caught the way her eyes flicked toward the door. You didn't see us, he said. The doctor swallowed. I saw a woman who fell. Gideon nodded. That was enough. The knock came again, harder this time. Wood groaned. Someone outside laughed, a short bark of a sound that carried heat and drink. Gideon pushed the back door open into the alley. Cold slid in, sharp as a blade. He led them out without hurry, as if they belonged there, as if the town had not just tried to tear Clara to pieces. The gray horse waited where he'd left it, head low, breath steaming. Gideon swung Jonah up first, settling him forward against the saddle horn, then turned to Clara. Left foot, he said quietly. She stepped when he told her to, pain flaring bright and quick. Gideon's hand came firm at her waist, not gripping, not lingering, and she was up, the horse shifting once under the new weight before going still again. Gideon mounted behind her in one smooth motion, reins gathered. From the square came the scrape of boots, the slosh of a bottle breaking. Firelight leapt against walls. Now, Gideon said. He turned the horse down the narrow lane that led toward the river, away from the church, away from the main road. Hooves struck dirt, then stone, then dirt again. The gray lengthened his stride without being asked. Jonah's small back pressed into Clara's chest. She wrapped an arm around him and felt how fast his heart ran. They cut past the livery and into the dark, the town thinning behind them. Gideon didn't look back. He counted turns in his head, she could tell. His body knew the way hands know a familiar knot. A shout went up behind them. Another voice joined it. Then the ring of iron as someone struck flint to steel. A torch flared. Clara's breath stuttered. Gideon leaned forward, close enough that she felt his words more than heard them. When I say down, you go flat. Don't argue me. She nodded into the night. They reached the river bend where the bank dropped sharp and the water ran fast and black. Gideon turned the horse upstream, then angled back toward the far side, hooves splashing shallow. The gray snorted, ears flicking, but kept his feet. Hoofbeats thundered on the road behind them. Too many. Too close. Down, Gideon said. He leaned back and drew Clara and Jonah against him in one motion, then tipped them forward, low over the saddle. Clara flattened herself along the horse's neck, one hand gripping mane, the other curled tight around Jonah's middle. She forced her breathing to slow. 1, 2, 3. The riders burst into view on the road, torches bobbing like angry stars. Voices cracked. There! By the water! Gideon didn't move. He let the gray stand half in shadow, half in mist, the river's noise swallowing sound. A torch swung wide and missed them by yards. Minutes dragged. Clara felt Jonah's breath warm against her wrist. He did not cry. He did not move. I learned how quiet a heart can be. The riders passed. Their shouts thinned, then scattered, splitting into smaller groups like a net thrown too wide. Gideon waited longer than felt safe. Then he nudged the gray forward, slow as prayer. They climbed the bank and turned toward the trees, the pines closing around them like a held breath finally let out. They rode until the town fell away completely, and the night grew honest, cold, star-pricked, and empty. Gideon took a narrow trail that climbed into rock and scrub, a place where wheels couldn't go and men didn't like to follow. Clara's arms burned. She shifted once and bit back a sound. "You all right?" Gideon asked, not looking back. "Yes," she lied. He adjusted the reins and slowed, letting the gray pick his way. They reached a shallow cut in the stone, a crease just wide enough to shelter 3 bodies from wind. Gideon dismounted and lifted Jonah down first, then offered Clara his hand. Her boots hit ground and her knees nearly folded. Gideon caught her elbow, steadying her without comment. He set a blanket against the rock, then built a small fire with twigs and moss, coaxing it into life without a spark showing beyond the stone. Jonah sat close to Clara, hands tucked into his sleeves. Gideon poured water into the tin cup and passed it. Clara drank and felt it move through her like a promise she didn't trust yet. "Why us?" she asked. The question surprised her as much as him. Gideon sat opposite, the fire low between them. He sharpened the edge of his axe with slow, even strokes. The sound was soft, final. "Because you were there," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." The wind moved through the pines above them, a long sigh. From far off came a different sound, the thin, high note of a hymn carried on air, someone singing late for Christmas. The words lost, but the shape familiar. Gideon stilled the axe for a moment, listening, then went back to work. Clara watched his hands, scarred, steady. She noticed the way he kept space between them, how he placed the blanket so it did not touch her until she pulled it closer herself. "You don't have to keep going," she said. "If you turn back now—" "I won't," he said, gentle and absolute. Jonah shifted. The brass button slipped from his collar and clinked against stone. Gideon's eyes went to it again, sharp this time. "That mark," he said. "Where'd it come from?" Jonah looked to Clara. "It was sewn on his shirt when I found him," Clara said. "By the river. Years ago." Gideon's sharpening slowed. "Found. Yes. Anyone else know?" "No." The fire popped once. Gideon set the axe aside and leaned back against the rock, gaze lifted to the black between branches. "There are men who used that mark," he said. "Not here, not lately." Clara felt the night tilt. What kind of men? The kind who don't want to be remembered. A shout echoed faint and angry below them, then another. Gideon stood, shouldered his pack, and handed Clara a fur cloak, his own. "It'll get colder where we're going," he said. She hesitated. "Then what will you wear?" Gideon shrugged. "I've had worse." She took the cloak. The fur was heavy, clean, and smelled of smoke. She wrapped it around Jonah, too, tucking him in. They rode again before the fire's heat could make a promise it couldn't keep. Dawn came pale and hard, light spilling into the high places first. Gideon guided them to a cabin tucked into the trees, low and square, roof weighted with stone. Smoke ghosted from the chimney, old, not fresh. Inside, the space was spare and clean. A cot, 2 chairs, a table with tools laid neat, jars of dried meat, a Bible on the shelf, spine cracked, a sprig of pine tucked between pages like a bookmark waiting for a day that mattered. Gideon lit the lamp and set water to boil. He handed Clara a pair of worn shoes from a chest, soles thin but serviceable. "They'll do," he said. "For now." She sank onto the chair, exhaustion finally finding her. Gideon knelt and began sewing new hide onto the soles with quick, sure hands. "You don't have to," she began. He didn't look up. "I do." Jonah drifted toward the fire and crouched, watching the kettle. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the brass button, turning it in the light. "Keep that close," Gideon said, eyes flicking up, "but don't show it." Jonah nodded solemnly and tucked it away. The kettle sang. Gideon poured 3 cups. He set one by Clara's hand and one by Jonah's, then took the third himself. Outside, a branch cracked. Gideon's head lifted, listening. Nothing followed. He stood and went to the door, resting his palm against the wood. He spoke without turning. "They'll sweep the roads first," he said. "Then the river. They won't come up here until they're angry enough to make mistakes." Clara's voice was steady when she asked, "And if they do?" Gideon opened the door and looked out at the trees, the mountains holding their own counsel. "Then we'll be gone," he said, "or we'll be ready." He turned back to her, eyes level, offering something that was not comfort and not fear, only choice. "Stay," he said, "until this breaks one way or the other." The words hung there, heavy as a gate. Clara looked at Jonah, at the cloak around his shoulders, at the mended shoes in Gideon's hands. "What if staying makes it worse?" she asked. Gideon met her gaze. "What if leaving already did?" The question settled between them, quiet and dangerous, opening a door neither of them could see past yet. Clara did not answer him right away. She stood with Jonah tucked against her side, the cabin holding its breath around them. The kettle hissed low, like it knew better than to call attention to itself. "What if staying teaches them where to look?" she said finally. Gideon nodded once, as if he'd been carrying the same question in his pocket. He went to the door and stepped out, boots crunching soft frost. He didn't take the rifle. He didn't need it for what he was doing. Clara watched him move through the trees, checking the ground, reading the night's leftovers the way some men read scripture. When he came back in, his face told her more than his words. "They've been near," he said. "Not since dawn. But they're thinking." Jonah shifted. The brass button knocked once against his chest, a small, bright sound in the quiet. He stilled his hands like he'd been taught. Gideon crouched to Jonah's level. "You sleep light?" Jonah nodded. "I listen." "That's good," Gideon said. "If you hear hooves, you wake me, not your mama." Jonah frowned. "Why not mama?" "Because I asked you," Gideon said, and smiled a little so the order didn't land like fear. Jonah accepted that. He always did. Clara sat at the table and opened her small leather notebook. She wrote when the world pressed too close. She wrote lists when her hands shook. She wrote names she refused to forget. Now she wrote nothing at all, just ran her finger along the edge of the page until the shaking passed. The cabin warmed by degrees. Gideon fixed the shoes and set them near the hearth, then stitched a tear in Jonah's coat without comment. He moved like a man who'd learned to keep busy because stillness asked questions he didn't answer out loud. Outside, the wind rose and fell. Snow came light and dry, dusting the pines like ash. It was nearly noon when the knock came. Not hard, not friendly. 3 taps, measured. Clara's heart lurched. Jonah froze. Gideon held up a hand and waited through another breath, listening past the sound to the shape of it. He went to the door and opened it just enough to see. The deputy stood there, hat in both hands, breath fogging the air. He looked smaller up close, stripped of the square and the crowd. "I tracked you wrong on purpose," the deputy said. "They went south." Gideon studied him. "Why?" The deputy swallowed. "Because the boy's a child." Gideon opened the door another inch. "That's a start." "They're talking about the church," the deputy went on. "About cleansing, about paper with seals, about taking him." Clara stepped forward then, spine straight despite the ache that lived in her. "On what charge?" The deputy's eyes flicked to her wrists, then away. "On whatever they can write fast enough." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Who's leading it?" The deputy hesitated. "Your husband," he said to Clara, "and the deacon." Jonah made a small sound, like a swallowed word. "They're saying the mark proves it," the deputy added, "saying there was a case, years back, a girl found by the river." The room narrowed. Clara felt it in her ears first, the way blood rushes when a truth steps too close. "What girl?" she asked. The deputy shifted his feet. "Name was Ruth. Folks said she ran. Folks said a lot of things." Gideon's hand went still on the table. "I knew that name." Clara looked at him. The scar at his wrist. She'd noticed it the night before. Thin and pale. She'd noticed the way he flinched when the hymn drifted down the mountain. "Ruth was your sister," she said, not asking. Gideon nodded once. "She was promised to a man with land." The deputy cleared his throat. "They said she fell." Gideon's voice came even. "She didn't." Silence set its weight down. Clara took Jonah's hand and felt how tight he held on. "The mark," she said. "You think it's connected." "I know it is," Gideon said. "It was stitched by a woman who made charms to keep her children safe." The deputy's eyes widened. "My mother had one." Gideon looked at him sharply. Did, the deputy corrected. "She said it was for nights when men came drunk." Clara's breath caught. She saw the river again in her mind, the way water hides what it takes. "I found Jonah near the bend," she said, 3 winters ago, wrapped in a coat too big for him. The button was sewn inside." Gideon closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them. "Then they'll come here," he said, "because they think the past belongs to them." The deputy set his hat back on. "I can buy you time. Not much." "How?" Clara asked. "By being slow," he said. "By misplacing men." Gideon nodded. "That'll cost you." The deputy shrugged. "So does being fast." He left without another word. Clara sat heavily. "They'll take him," she said. "If I stay." Gideon met her eyes. "They'll try." Jonah looked between them, reading the shape of danger in their faces. "Did I do wrong?" he asked. "No," Clara said at once. "Never." Gideon crouched again. "Listen to me, son," he said. "If anyone asks your name, you tell them Jonah. If anyone asks about the mark, you tell them nothing. If anyone tries to take you, you bite." Jonah considered this. "Hard?" "As hard as you can," Gideon said. Jonah nodded. "Okay." The afternoon stretched thin. Gideon checked the tree line twice more. Clara packed what little they had, hands steady now. She left the notebook on the table, then picked it up again and tucked it into her coat. Some things were light enough to carry. Near dusk, the sound came again. Hooves this time, distant but growing. Voices floated up, sharper than the wind. Gideon took the rifle from its hooks and checked the chamber. He handed Clara the small knife. "For you," he said. She took it. "I won't use it unless I have to. That's all it's for." They moved without speaking, Gideon leading them out the back and up the rock spine behind the cabin. The snow had stopped. Tracks would show. "They'll see where we went," Clara whispered. "Yes," Gideon said. "That's the point." They climbed until the cabin sank into the trees below them, then turned along a ledge that narrowed to nothing and widened again. Gideon cut a branch and dragged it behind them to blur the trail, then doubled back once, stepping in his own prints. The shouts grew louder below. Torches flared. A dog barked. Gideon stopped at a break in the rock where the land fell away into a bowl of stone and shadow. He turned to Clara. "If they find us," he said, "you go that way." He pointed to a cleft barely wide enough for a body. "I'll go the other." Clara shook her head. "I'm not leaving you." "You already did once," he said gently. "It kept him safe." Jonah clutched Clara's coat. "No," he said. Gideon looked at the boy. "If I say run, you run." Jonah swallowed. "Together?" Gideon paused. "If I can." The first men crested the ridge, torches bobbing, breath loud. Someone laughed when they saw the empty cabin below. "There," a voice called. "Up there." Gideon stepped forward into the open. "Evening," he said. The men slowed, surprised by the calm of it. One lifted his gun. Another peered past Gideon, trying to see what he hid. "She's ours," a man said. "By law." "Not tonight," Gideon said. A dog strained at its leash, whining. "Hand over the boy," the man went on, "and you can walk away." Gideon smiled without humor. "You don't know how to read a mountain," he said. "That's your trouble." He raised the rifle, not at a man, but at the torch in the nearest hand, and fired. Flame vanished into snow. Darkness fell hard and sudden. The dog lunged. Men shouted. Gideon turned, grabbed Clara's arm, and ran. They plunged into the cleft, stone scraping skin, breath tearing. Jonah stumbled and Gideon lifted him without breaking stride. A shot cracked behind them. Rock chipped. Snow burst. They burst out the far side and slid down a slope of loose shale, catching themselves on roots and cold dirt. Gideon shoved Clara ahead, then followed, boots skidding. At the bottom, the forest closed in again. The sounds above scattered, confused. They didn't stop until their lungs burned and the world narrowed to the sound of their own breath. Gideon set Jonah down and knelt, hands on thighs. Clara bent over, hands on her knees, laughing once, a broken sound that surprised her. "They'll come again," she said. "Yes," Gideon said. "Soon?" "Yes." Clara straightened and met his eyes. "Then we can't keep running." Gideon studied her face, the resolve set there like iron. He nodded slowly. "There's a place," he said, "where papers matter, where marks can be read by men who don't drink." "How far?" she asked. "Far enough to change names," he said. Close enough to reach before winter locks the passes. Clara took Jonah's hand. She felt the small squeeze of his fingers, certain and brave. "What do we need?" she asked. Gideon slung the rifle and turned north, toward higher ground and thinner air. "A reason," he said, "and the nerve to use it." He looked back at her, the mountain quiet around them, and asked the question that would not let go. "Will you ride into town to tell the truth, if it means everyone hears it?" Clara did not answer at once. She watched Jonah brush snow from his sleeve with the seriousness of a man twice his age. The forest held its breath, listening for what she would choose. "If I ride back," she said, "they won't just listen, they'll judge." "They already did," Gideon said. "That's different," she said. "Listening gives them permission." Gideon studied her the way he studied weather. So does silence. They moved before the argument could harden. Gideon set a pace that saved breath and knees, skirting ridges where sound carried wrong, and cutting through draws where the earth swallowed tracks. Jonah rode between them when the ground allowed, walking when it didn't, never complaining. When he stumbled, Gideon lifted him. When Clara faltered, Jonah took her hand first. I kept thinking the ground would open. They reached a high shelf above the river by mid-morning. Gideon stopped there, scanning the far bank where the road bent toward town. Smoke rose thin and straight. Market day, even now. "They'll be in the square," Gideon said. "They always are." Clara nodded. "Then that's where it has to be said." They washed in the river, quick and cold. Gideon wrapped Clara's wrists again, cleaner this time, knots neat and easy to undo. He brushed Jonah's hair flat with water and tied the scarf back where it wouldn't slip. Clara took the brass button from Jonah's shirt and held it up to the light. The wolf's head stared back, worn soft at the edges by years of touch. "Do you remember the woman who sewed this?" Gideon asked. Jonah shook his head. "She sang." "Do you remember the song?" Jonah frowned, thinking. "It had a light in it." Gideon nodded. "That'll do." They rode down in daylight, not hiding. Gideon kept his hands away from the rifle. Clara sat straight. Jonah held the button in his fist like a promise. The town came into view slow and familiar, roofs sagging the same, porches crowded the same. The bell rang once, then twice. Noon. A murmur rippled as they entered the square. Heads turned. Voices rose. Someone laughed, sharp with relief, as if a story had finally returned to its proper place. "There she is," a man called. "The thief." "Monster's back," another said, too loud. Gideon dismounted first and helped Clara down. He set Jonah between them and stepped back half a pace, enough to show the choice was hers. Her husband pushed through the crowd with the deacon at his shoulder. The deputy hovered near the post office, face tight. "By the authority of this town," the deacon began, lifting his book. Clara raised her hand. The gesture was small. It stopped him anyway. "I'll speak," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Then you can decide if your words still fit." Laughter snorted and died. She stepped forward, boots firm on the packed earth where she'd been dragged days before. She held up her wrists, bandaged now but still red. "This is what you called justice," she said. "You watched me pulled like a sack of grain. You called it law because it spared you the trouble of choosing." A man shifted. A woman tightened her shawl. "My body failed me," Clara went on. That is not a crime. If it were, you'd have to lock up the winter. Someone scoffed. Gideon did not move. She turned and set Jonah beside her. This is Jonah. You called him beast. Jonah lifted his chin. He held out the brass button. This was sewn by a woman named Ruth, Clara said. She made them for children who needed keeping. She sang while she stitched. Ask your mothers if they remember. A murmur moved through the square like wind in dry grass. Her husband laughed again, too loud. Stories, he said. She spins them like wool. Clara met his eyes. You were there, she said, by the river. Silence fell hard. The deacon opened his mouth. The deputy didn't. Gideon stepped forward then, just enough to be seen. He did not speak. A woman at the edge of the crowd, gray hair pulled tight, hands knotted, stepped into the open. She took off her hat. I remember, she said. Ruth wore blue thread. My mother had one too. Her husband's face drained. You lie, he said. The woman's voice steadied. I watched you drag her behind the stables, she said. I was afraid. Clara did not look at Gideon. She did not need to. The deacon's book sagged in his hands. This is not the place. It is, Clara said, because you made it one. Her husband reached for his belt. Gideon moved between him and Clara without haste. Don't, Gideon said. The deputy stepped forward at last. He took the man's arm. Enough! The crowd leaned in, hungry now for a different ending. Her husband wrenched free and lunged, not at Gideon, but at Jonah. His hand closed on the boy's sleeve. Clara moved without thinking. She drove her shoulder in and went down with him, dirt in her mouth, rage bright and clean. Gideon was there an instant later. He pulled the man off and pinned him, forearm across the chest, knee firm at the shoulder. The man thrashed and cursed. Let him up, someone shouted. Gideon looked at the deputy. Cuff him! The deputy hesitated. Then he did it. The square breathed out. Clara stood, shaking now that it was over. Jonah pressed into her side. The deacon cleared his throat. We will convene. No, Gideon said. You will listen. He turned to the crowd. You don't get to wash this with prayer, he said. You fix it with truth. The words sat there. Some faces hardened, others softened. No one laughed. Clara took Jonah's hand and felt the button warm against her palm. We're leaving, she said. Today. Where? A man asked. Where names mean what they're meant to, Gideon said. They did not linger. Gideon took what was owed. 2 coins the doctor pressed into his hand. A loaf a woman set on the saddle without meeting Clara's eyes. The deputy tipped his hat. At the edge of town, the bell rang again, not for them. They rode until the roofs sank away and the road narrowed to honest dirt. The river kept pace, then fell behind. Jonah leaned back against Clara, sleepy with the release. Mama, he said, did we win? Clara kissed the top of his head. We chose, she said. Gideon glanced back once, then faced forward. The mountains waited, patient as ever. By dusk they reached a stand of trees, where the land opened toward a distant settlement, smoke rising steady and straight. Gideon reined in. There, he said. Papers, witnesses, a place that listens. Clara looked, then looked at him. And you? Gideon shrugged. I know the way. She nodded. The choice had already been made, but naming it mattered. Ride with us, she said. He did not answer at once. He looked at Jonah, at the road, at the light thinning over the hills. I will, he said, if you'll let me stand where it's hardest. Clara met his eyes. That's where we'll be. They rode on, the sound of hooves steady, the river whispering behind them. Ahead, the road bent toward a town that did not know their names yet. And that, Gideon thought, was the only beginning worth trusting. They reached the listening town by dusk, the kind of place where smoke rose straight and stayed that way. Gideon slowed the horse at the edge of it, as if speed itself could offend the buildings. A clerk's window glowed. A church door stood open, candlelight gathered like breath inside. Names, Gideon said, spelled slow. Clara nodded. She lifted Jonah down and felt how heavy he was now. Not weight, but consequence. He clutched the brass button in his fist, thumb worrying the wolf's head smooth. Inside the clerk's office, the air smelled of ink and dust. Gideon stood back. Clara stepped forward alone. I want to file a statement, she said, and a petition. The clerk blinked. On what grounds? Truth, Clara said. The word landed. The clerk gestured her to the counter and set paper down with care, as if it might bite. Clara took the pen. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. She wrote her name. She wrote Jonah's. She wrote what had been done in the square, what had been said by the river years before, what had been stitched into a button and carried through winters. I learned that ink can bruise. The clerk read without comment. When he finished, he lifted his eyes. This brings men, he said. Yes, Clara said. He reached for a seal. It also brings witnesses. A bell rang outside. One clear note, and the clerk paused, listening. You'll want the church, he said. Not the sermon, the records. Gideon nodded once. They crossed the street together. Inside, the church was quiet, but for the scrape of a broom. Pine sprigs had been tucked along the railings, needles dropping like time. A small manger sat near the altar, unfinished, the child's face still a blank curve of wood. The keeper of records looked up from a ledger. What do you need? Entries, Gideon said. From the winter Ruth died. The keeper hesitated. Those pages are thin. So is truth, Gideon said. Hold it up to light. The keeper sighed and fetched the book. Clara leaned in. Names marched across the page in patient ink. One line broke rhythm, cramped and dark. The seal pressed crooked, as if the hand that made it had been shoved. There, Gideon said softly. The keeper swallowed. That seal was recalled. Why? Because it was wrong, the keeper said. Because it was used to move a body without questions. Clara's breath tightened. She touched the page with 2 fingers and felt the past press back. Outside, a murmur grew. Boots scuffed. Voices rose. Someone laughed the way men laugh when they believe paper can't stop them. They followed, Jonah whispered. Gideon went to the door and listened. He closed it again, calm as setting a cup down. Stay, he said to Clara. Finish. Clara finished. The keeper stamped the petition, straight this time. The sound was small. It mattered. They stepped back into the street together. A knot of men waited, faces set, coats open. One pointed. That's them. Gideon did not move first. He let the clerk step out, papers in hand. He let the keeper follow, ledger under his arm. He let the law take shape without a raised voice. "By record," the clerk said, "there is cause." A man spat. "Cause for what?" "For hearing," the clerk said, "and restraint." A hand went to a belt. Gideon stepped half a pace forward. Not a challenge, a statement. "Not tonight," he said. A woman broke from the crowd and pressed close to Clara, breath hot with fear. "They'll come for you after dark," she whispered. "They always do." Clara met her eyes. "Then don't look away," she said. Snow began to fall, light, honest. The men shifted. Cold finds the cracks in bravado. The deputy from before appeared at the edge of the square, breath fogging. He lifted his chin at Gideon. "They're riding," he said. "From the old town." "How many?" Gideon asked. "Enough to try." Gideon looked at the clerk. "Can you hold?" The clerk hesitated. "For a night." Gideon nodded. "Then we'll give you a night." They moved without signal. Gideon led Clara and Jonah through an alley and into a low building that smelled of iron and oil. A blacksmith stood there, hammer mid-air. "I need chains," Gideon said, "and a bell." The blacksmith blinked. "For what?" "For warning," Gideon said. The bell went up at the edge of the square where sound could travel. Chains were laid across doors and posts, not to lock people in, but to slow men down. Snow thickened. Someone began to sing, quiet at first. A verse of a carol, half remembered, lifted and wavered. It didn't sanctify the night. It steadied it. They waited. Hooves came like a promise kept badly. Torches flared at the street's mouth. A shout split the cold. Gideon stepped into the open, rifle slung low, hands clear. Clara stood behind him, Jonah between them, button warm in her palm. "This is where it stops," Gideon called. A man laughed. "You and what army?" Gideon did not answer. He raised the bell rope and rang once. From doorways, men and women stepped out. Not armed, not brave, just present. The clerk, the keeper, the blacksmith, the woman from the square. Presence made weight. The riders slowed. Their leader's eyes flicked to the chains, the bell, the faces. "By whose authority?" the leader demanded. "By record," the clerk said, voice thin but steady. "By witness." The leader's gaze slid to Clara. "Hand over the boy." "No," Clara said. The leader smiled. "Then we'll take him." Gideon moved then, not fast, not slow. He planted his feet and lifted the rifle, not to aim at a man, but to lay it across his forearms, a bar. "Try," he said. The leader looked past him to Jonah. "That mark proves—" "It proves nothing," the keeper said, "except that you remember what you did." Snow fell harder. Torches guttered. A man from the riders lunged. Gideon swung the rifle butt, not to crush a skull, but to break a knee. The man went down screaming. Chaos rippled, brief and sharp. Clara pulled Jonah back as bodies pressed. She felt a hand brush her sleeve and slashed with the small knife, shallow and clean. The hand vanished. I learned how quickly fear learns manners. The deputy's whistle cut through the noise. More boots, from the listening town, from alleys, from doors that had been waiting to open. The riders broke. Some fled. Some stood stunned. The leader backed away, eyes on Gideon, measuring. This isn't over, he said. No, Gideon agreed. It's begun. The night loosened. Snow softened the edges. The bell rang again, slower this time, a sound that said, "Stay awake." Inside the clerk's office, Clara sat with Jonah wrapped in a blanket. Gideon stood at the window, watching the street empty. "You'll need to testify," the clerk said. "Soon." Clara nodded. "I will." Gideon turned. "We'll go with you, he said. "To the county seat, where seals mean something." "And if they ride again?" Clara asked. Gideon's mouth tilted, not quite a smile. "Then we ride smarter." Jonah looked up, eyes bright in the lamplight. "Do we keep the button?" "Yes," Clara said. "We keep it." Gideon knelt and took the button once, turned it and handed it back. "Not as proof," he said, "as promise." Outside, the carol found its chorus at last. The child in the manger was set in place, wood smoothed by a careful hand. Clara closed her eyes for a breath and opened them again. "When do we leave?" she asked. Gideon met her gaze, the answer already waiting. "At first light," he said, "if you'll trust me to take the long way." She did not hesitate. "I will." The question hung, sharp as frost on iron, opening the next door. "Will you stand in a courtroom?" Gideon asked, "and say their names out loud?" They left before the bell could argue with daylight. Snow held the town in a clean grip, muting sound, forgiving nothing. Gideon took the road that bent away from the river, then cut it short into open ground where wheels hated to go. Clara rode steady behind him, Jonah tucked close, the brass button warm as a coal in his fist. By mid-morning, the wind sharpened. Gideon set a pace that saved the horse, counting rises and dips with his shoulders. Clara learned the rhythm, lean when the ground leaned, breathe when the horse did. She kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut. The long way had rules. A crow lifted from a fence post ahead and circled once, black against the white. Gideon slowed. "Tracks," he said. Clara saw them then, shallow, recent, angling to cross their path. Not many. Enough. "Can we outride?" she asked. "Yes," Gideon said. "But we won't." He turned them off the line and down into a shallow draw where snow thinned and stone showed through. He dismounted, led the horse a dozen yards, then mounted again. The tracks would lie to anyone reading fast. Jonah watched with a solemn frown. "Are we hiding?" "We're choosing," Gideon said. They rode until the sun stood straight overhead, and the land opened into a long basin rimmed with cottonwood. Smoke showed there, low and honest. A homestead. Gideon angled toward it. A woman came out with a shawl pulled tight, eyes wary but not afraid. Gideon tipped his hat. "We're passing through," he said, "for water." She studied Clara's bandaged wrists, Jonah's thin boots. She nodded once and brought a bucket. While the horse drank, Clara filled her canteen. The woman leaned close. "They're asking," she said. "Men with paper and talk." Clara's jaw set. "Did you answer?" "I said I'd seen snow," the woman said. "Nothing else." Clara thanked her. The woman pressed a small loaf into Jonah's hands and touched his hair like she'd forgotten how to do it. They rode on. The basin funneled sound. Gideon heard it before Clara did. The faint clatter of iron, voices carried wrong. He reined in and pointed. "Up," he said. They climbed the rim and crossed where the ground broke into ribs of rock. Halfway across, a shot cracked below. Snow burst at Gideon's boot. "Down," he said. Clara flattened, pulling Jonah with her. Gideon slid off the saddle and took the reins low, moving the horse sideways until the rock hid them. Another shot rang, closer this time. "They've split," Gideon said. "Two on the low road, one high." He looked at Clara. "If I say go—" "I know," she said. He didn't argue. He lifted the rifle and fired, not at a man, but at the rock above him. Stone chipped, and the sound leapt wide. The rider cursed. Gideon moved left, then right, then left again, making the mountain lie. Minutes stretched. A shadow crossed the rim and vanished. Hooves retreated. Jonah's breath came fast. Gideon crouched beside him. "Good listening," he said. Jonah nodded, pride and fear fighting in his face. They did not stop until the basin lay far behind them and the wind carried only itself. By afternoon, the sky thinned to a hard blue. Gideon guided them into timber and set a small fire under a rock lip. He boiled water and tore the loaf into careful pieces. Clara ate and felt the edge ease. She watched Gideon's hands as he worked. Sure, restrained, never wasting a motion. She watched the way he placed himself between her and the open, even when no one was there. "You don't have to keep standing like that," she said. He looked up. "Like what?" "Like the world's coming through the trees." Gideon considered. "It often does." Jonah finished his bread and held out the button. "Can I ask something?" "Yes," Clara said. "Was the woman with the song afraid?" Gideon took the button and turned it once. "Yes," he said. "And she sang anyway." Jonah nodded, satisfied. The wind shifted as dusk came on. Gideon's shoulders tightened. "We won't make the pass before dark," he said. "There's a place." The place was a lean-to tucked into stone, old and used, with a hearth that remembered hands. Gideon laid fresh boughs and set the fire low. Clara unrolled the blanket and tucked Jonah in, the cloak pulled to his chin. A sprig of pine hung from a nail above the hearth. Someone had tied it with twine years before and left it. Gideon noticed and left it be. The night settled. Gideon took first watch, sitting with his back to the rock, rifle across his knees. Clara lay awake, listening to the fire and the wind arguing softly. "You should sleep," he said without turning. "I'm trying," she said. Silence worked between them. Then Clara spoke into it. "If I say their names," she said, "they'll say I'm bitter." "They'll say it anyway," Gideon said. "They'll say I taught the boy to lie." "They'll say it anyway." She sat up. "And if the paper isn't enough?" Gideon looked at her then. "Paper starts things," he said. "It doesn't finish them." "What finishes them?" "People staying." Clara thought of the woman with the shawl, the clerk, the keeper, the bell. "I can stay," she said. "I can stand." Gideon nodded. "I know. I didn't know I could be brave this way." Near midnight, Jonah stirred. "Someone's there," he whispered. Gideon rose, moving quiet. He listened, then relaxed a degree. "Dear," he said, "you did right." Morning came thin and bright. They broke camp and climbed the last rise to the pass. From the top, the county road showed itself, rutted, busy, real. A stage rolled in the distance. Gideon turned the horse down the far side. "Once we join that road," he said, "we're not shadows anymore." Clara squared her shoulders. "Good." They joined it by noon. A pair of riders slowed to stare. Gideon stared back until they moved on. At a crossroads, they met the county marshal. Broad hat, steady eyes. Gideon lifted his chin. "We're headed in," he said, "with statements." The marshal looked at Clara's wrists, Jonah's boots. "You'll come with me," he said. Not a threat, a rule. They rode into town with the marshal's badge catching light. It felt different. Clara felt it in her spine. At the courthouse steps, Gideon dismounted and helped Clara down. He did not follow her inside at first. He stood with Jonah, a step back, letting the choice be hers. Clara paused at the door. She touched the wood once, feeling the grain. She turned. "If I do this," she said, "they'll know where we are." Gideon met her eyes. "Yes." "And if they come?" Gideon's mouth set. "Then they come to a place that listens." She nodded. She went in. Inside, the room smelled of ink and old air. A clerk looked up. "Name?" Clara spoke it. She spoke Jonah's. She spoke the winter by the river. She spoke the square. She spoke the mark. Outside, Gideon waited. He watched the road. He watched the door. He watched Jonah trace the wolf's head with his thumb until the line grew smooth. The bell in town rang the hour. Snow began again, light and patient. The door opened. Clara stepped out, face pale and clear. "They'll set a date," she said. Gideon nodded. "We'll be here." She hesitated. "I don't want him hearing everything." Gideon knelt to Jonah. "You don't have to hear what hurts," he said. "You only have to know why." Jonah looked between them. "Are we staying?" Clara took a breath. "Yes," she said, "for now." Gideon stood. "Then we find a room," he said, "and witnesses." He looked at Clara, the road stretching behind them and ahead, and asked the question that cracked the day open. "Will you let me put my name next to yours, on paper, so they can't pull you apart again?" Clara did not answer him right away. The courthouse steps held the cold the way stone always does, as if memory lived there. Jonah stood between them, tracing the wolf's head until it shone. "What would your name do?" she asked. "It would slow them," Gideon said, "and it would bind me." She studied his face for the tell that wasn't there. "You'd take that?" "Yes." A wagon rattled past. Someone laughed too loud on the corner. Life went on, careless and stubborn. "All right," Clara said, "if it keeps him whole." Gideon nodded once, the decision settling like a weight he chose to carry. They found a room above a dry goods store where the floor slanted and the window stuck. Gideon paid a week ahead and asked for nails and twine. He hung the extra blanket across the door frame and tested the latch until it stopped rattling. Clara set Jonah on the bed and peeled his boots off, rubbing warmth back into his feet with practiced hands. "Do we have to be quiet?" Jonah asked. "Only when we're listening," Gideon said. That night the town sounded different. More voices, more iron. Gideon took the chair by the window. Clara lay awake longer than she meant to, watching the shape of him against the glass. When sleep finally took her, it came thin and light. She woke to the sound of paper. Gideon stood at the small table, the clerk's form spread out, a stub of pencil in his fingers. He'd written his name where it asked for interested parties. He'd left the rest blank. "You didn't have to start," she said. "I didn't finish," he said. "Your hand should do that." They went back to the courthouse early, before the hall warmed with bodies. The clerk set the forms down and cleared his throat. "This binds you," he said to Gideon, "to appear, to answer, to stand." "I stand," Gideon said. Clara took the pencil. Her hand shook once, then steadied. She wrote her name beside his. She wrote Jonah's beneath, small and careful. I felt the room lean. Outside, a pair of men watched from across the street. Gideon saw them and did not look away. By noon, the rumor had grown legs. A woman brought stew to the room and left it without meeting Clara's eyes. A man tipped his hat at Gideon and moved on. The marshal stopped by to say nothing and stayed longer than needed. "They're gathering," he said at last. "Not here. There." "Where?" Clara asked. "By the old bridge, Fautsum," he said. "They think the river remembers." Gideon's jaw tightened. "When?" "Tonight," the marshal said. Clara closed her eyes for a breath. When she opened them, she was clear. "Then we don't give them night." They moved before dusk. Gideon led them along the road and off it again, down through willow and mud to the bridge where the planks groaned under memory. Men stood there already, some with torches, some with hands in pockets, some pretending they'd come by accident. Her husband stepped forward, clean-shaven now, eyes bright with purpose. "You brought the boy," he said, smiling. "Good." Clara did not slow. She stepped onto the bridge and stopped at its center. "You said the river remembers," she said. "So listen." The men laughed. One spat into the water. Gideon took one step forward and stopped. He let her speak. "So, this bridge," Clara said, "is where you stood when you told me I was nothing. This water is where you told her she fell." A murmur ran. Her husband's smile slipped. "Careful." "I am," Clara said. "I'm careful with truth." She reached into Jonah's coat and took the button. She held it up where the torchlight could find it. "This was sewn by Ruth," she said. "She sang while she stitched. You heard her." A man at the edge shifted. Another turned away. Her husband laughed, brittle. "Stories." Gideon spoke then, quiet and even. "Your scar," he said. "Left cheek, knife slipped." The laughter died. The marshal stepped forward. "We'll hear this at the courthouse," he said. "Here," Clara said. "Now." She turned to the crowd. "If you think I lie, say it to my face." No one spoke. A woman stepped out, hands shaking. "I saw him," she said. "By the stables." Another voice followed, older. "So did I." Her husband's hand went to his belt. Gideon moved, not fast, not slow, and took it away. "Enough," the marshal said, loud now. "In custody." The bridge breathed. They took him without cheers. The torches guttered and went out. Men drifted away, smaller than they'd come. Clara sagged once, then caught herself. Jonah leaned into her, solid. "Did we finish?" he asked. "No," she said. "We began." The hearing came quick. The room filled. Names were read. Dates were spoken. The crooked seal was held to light. Witnesses stood and stood again. Her husband glared and said nothing. When it was done, the judge set a date and remanded him. Paper moved. Chains moved. The world shifted by inches. Outside, Gideon waited. Clara stepped down the steps and felt the air touch her face like permission. "It went forward," she said. Gideon nodded. "That's all it does." They walked to the room together. Jonah ran ahead and leapt onto the bed, laughing once before remembering himself. "Can we eat now?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, and laughed too, surprised by the sound. That night, Gideon did not take the chair. He took the floor, back to the wall. Clara slept deeper than she had in weeks. She woke to voices below. She listened. She heard nothing that mattered. In the morning, the marshal knocked. "They'll move him today," he said. "County jail." Clara nodded. "Thank you." The marshal hesitated. "You should know. This town will watch you." Gideon met his eyes. "Good." They walked to the square. A small crowd had gathered, quieter now. Her husband was led past them, eyes empty. He looked at Jonah. "You'll regret this," he said. Jonah looked back. "I'm Jonah," he said. The man said nothing else. They stood until the wagon rolled out of sight. Snow began again, patient. Back in the room, Clara folded the blanket and set the button on the table. Gideon watched her hands. "You did well," he said. She shook her head. "I stood." "That's what I meant." Jonah picked up the button and tucked it away. "What happens next?" Clara looked at Gideon. He answered without hurry. "We wait," he said. "We gather." "And if they come again?" Jonah asked. "Then they come to a place that listens," Gideon said. Clara took a breath and felt the space open around her. She turned to Gideon. "You asked about paper," she said. "About names." "Yes," he said. She nodded. "We'll file it." Gideon's shoulders eased a fraction. Outside, the bell rang the hour. The sound moved through the street and did not break. Clara looked at Jonah, then back at Gideon. "Stay," she said. He did. The door closed behind them, not as a lock, but as a choice that would have consequences, enough to carry them into what came next. Morning brought a different kind of noise. Not shouts, not laughter. Paper. Boots that knew where they were going. A wagon creaked past with iron singing under its breath. Clara dressed Jonah slow and neat, the way she did when the world asked for courage without saying why. Gideon tightened the laces on his boots and tested the door once, listening to the street answer back. "They'll watch," he said. Clara nodded. "Let them learn." They walked together toward the square. The courthouse steps were already busy, clerks moving, a marshal conferring, the bell silent but awake. People stood in small knots, not looking at each other too long. A rumor had weight now. It bent posture. A woman pressed through and caught Clara's sleeve. "I brought this," she said, thrusting a folded paper into her hand. "My husband won't sign it. I will." Clara took it. Another followed. Then another. Names stacked like kindling. I didn't know how fast courage spreads. By noon, the judge called for order. The room filled and spilled. Gideon took a place against the wall, Jonah beside him, small hand warm in his. Clara stood alone at the rail. They read the statements. The clerk read the crooked seal. The keeper read the margin note no one had wanted to hear. The judge listened without blinking. A murmur rose when the river was named. It stilled when the year was spoken out loud. "Witnesses," the judge said. They came. one by one. A woman with gray hands, a man with a limp, a boy grown now who remembered a song and a blue thread. Each voice laid a stone. Her husband stared straight ahead. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at Jonah. His hands were still. When it was done, the judge leaned back. "We will proceed," he said. "The defendant will remain in custody." The room breathed out. Outside, snow began again, light and persistent. Clara stepped down the steps and felt the air accept her. Gideon moved to her side without touching. "It's moving," he said. "Yes," she said. "So will they." The warning came before dusk. A boy ran up, breathless. "They're at the bridge," he said. "Talking." Gideon's eyes lifted. "How many?" "Enough," the boy said, and ran on. They did not go to the bridge. They went where sound carried wrong. Gideon led them to the high street and turned into the churchyard, the gate squealing once before he hushed it. Stones leaned in rows, names worn smooth. Pine needles stitched the ground. "If they come," Gideon said, "we don't answer noise with noise." Jonah nodded, solemn. Clara felt the calm settle in her bones, heavy and useful. They waited. Footsteps came. Voices. A torch guttered, then another. Men gathered beyond the gate, arguing low. Someone laughed, the sound brittle as glass. "They think the ground listens here," Gideon murmured. "Does it?" Jonah whispered. "It remembers," Gideon said. The gate rattled. A man shook it, then stopped. Another voice said a name Clara recognized. A neighbor's, not unkind, not brave. "Go home," Gideon called, not loud. "There's nothing here for you." A pause. Snow hissed in the torchlight. "Hand over the boy," a voice said, "and this ends." Clara stepped forward. "No," she said. "One word. Enough." A stone flew. It hit a marker and chipped a letter clean away. Gideon did not move. The marshal's whistle cut the dark. Boots ran. The gate opened from the inside and Law stepped in with lanterns held high. Faces were revealed. Men who worked. Men who drank. Men who would have sworn they were not cruel. "Disperse," the marshal said. Some did. Some did not. A scuffle broke, brief and ugly. Gideon took a blow meant for Jonah and returned none. The lantern light steadied. The gate closed again. When it was over, the street fell quiet. Snow covered the chip in the stone as if to apologize. They walked back slow. At the room, Gideon barred the door and sat with his back to it. Clara fed Jonah soup and watched the steam lift. "I'm tired," Jonah said. "I know," Clara said, and tucked him in. Gideon kept watch. The town tested itself against sleep and lost. Morning came with a knock. The marshal stood there, hat in hand. "They're moving him," he said. "To the county." Clara nodded. "When?" "Now." They went. The wagon rolled, iron singing again. A few stood to watch, fewer spoke. The bridge did not see him pass. Back in the square, the clerk waited with a stack of papers. "More names," he said, "and a notice." "For what?" Clara asked. "For protection," he said. "Temporary." Gideon read it once and folded it. "It buys time," he said. It buys breath, Clara said. They spent the afternoon gathering breath. A baker sent bread. A seamstress mended Jonah's coat and stitched the button inside with blue thread she kept for Sundays. Clara thanked her and felt something loosen. As dusk fell, Gideon stood by the window and watched the road. "They'll try something smaller," he said. "Not crowds. Corners." "I won't be alone," Clara said. "No," Gideon agreed. The night passed without test. The next morning brought a letter, sealed, straight this time. Gideon broke it and read. "Court date," he said. "Soon." Clara exhaled. "Good." They went to the clerk to file one more paper. Gideon's name went where it mattered. The clerk nodded and stamped. Outside, a man watched and turned away when Gideon looked back. "Are you afraid?" Jonah asked. Gideon considered. "I'm careful." Clara took Jonah's hand. "So am I." The day leaned toward evening. The town learned to lean with it. At supper, Gideon spoke without preface. "After court," he said, "we should go." "Where?" Clara asked. "North," he said. "Far enough to let this settle." Clara nodded. "We'll finish what we start." Jonah looked between them. "Do we keep the room?" "For now," Clara said. That night, as the bell rang the hour, Gideon asked the question that would not stay quiet. "When they ask you to speak again," he said, "will you say everything, even what hurts me?" Clara met his eyes. "Yes." He nodded, once. Outside, the snow kept coming, patient as a promise, opening the way into what the morning would demand. The court day broke clear and cold. Clara dressed Jonah in the mended coat, blue thread hidden like a held breath. Gideon checked the latch twice and slid the folded notice into his coat. Outside, the street had learned how to wait. They walked to the courthouse without hurry. People watched from doors and corners, some with faces set, some with eyes that asked forgiveness without asking it out loud. The bell did not ring. It didn't need to. Inside, the room filled the way water does, quietly, then all at once. The judge took his seat. The clerk called the matter. Paper answered back. Her husband was brought in, clean now, shorn of noise. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at Jonah. He stared at the rail like it might give him instructions. "Proceed," the judge said. Clara stepped forward alone. Gideon stayed back with Jonah, close enough to matter, far enough to let her stand. She put her hands on the rail and felt the grain under her palms. "State your name," the clerk said. She did. She stated Jonah's. She stated the winter by the river. She stated the square. The room leaned. She did not speak fast. She did not dress the words. She said where she fell and how the rope burned. She said what was shouted. She said what was done behind the stables years before, and she did not soften it for men who had mistaken comfort for mercy. I said it anyway. The defense tried to shake her. They asked about bitterness. They asked about motive. They asked about the mark. Clara lifted Jonah's coat just enough for the seamstress's stitch to show blue against brown. "It was sewn to keep him alive," she said, "not to excuse you." The judge held up a hand. "Witnesses." They came. One voice, then another. A man who remembered the scar. A woman who remembered the song. The keeper who remembered the crooked seal. The clerk who remembered where ink had been pushed. Her husband spoke last. He spoke little. He denied. He denied again. He denied as if repetition could become proof. The judge listened. The room listened. "Enough," the judge said. The ruling did not thunder. It settled. Custody continued. Charges set. A date named. Paper moved. Outside, breath came back into the day. The crowd thinned, then spread, then thinned again. Gideon stepped to Clara's side. "It held," he said. "For now," she said. They walked until the courthouse fell behind them. At the corner, a man stepped out too close. Gideon shifted, one step, blocking without touching. "Easy," the man said, palms up. "I just—" He trailed off, shame landing late. Clara nodded once and moved on. By afternoon, the sky tightened. Gideon took them to the livery where a room waited. Newer, quieter, paid. He set Jonah on the bed and closed the door. "Rest," he said. Jonah obeyed without argument. He slept like a stone dropped in water. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her fingers into her eyes until the ache dulled. Gideon stood at the window, watching the street write its own version of calm. "They'll test again," he said. "Yes," she said. "They'll try to make you small." She looked up. "I'm not." He nodded. "I know." A knock came at dusk. The marshal stood there with a man Clara did not know, older, careful, eyes like ledgers. "This is the county advocate," the marshal said. "He'll speak if you want him to." Clara studied the man. "Will you listen if I don't?" The advocate smiled thinly. "I already have." They spoke long, of dates and seals, of protection and distance, of what paper can and cannot do. "After the next hearing," the advocate said, "you should leave." "Yes," Clara said. "Not as flight," he said, "as choice." Gideon watched the door while they spoke, a habit he did not apologize for. Night fell with wind. Gideon took first watch again. Clara lay awake longer, listening to the building settle. "Gideon," she said. "Yes." "If they ask me to say more about you." He did not turn. "Say it." "There are things—" "Say them," he said. "Truth doesn't pick favorites." She swallowed. "All right." The wind found a crack and worried it. Gideon shifted and set it quiet. Near midnight, Jonah stirred. "Someone's outside," he whispered. Gideon rose. He listened, then relaxed a degree. "Drunk," he said, "not brave." They did not sleep much. Morning came with a letter slid under the door. Gideon read it and folded it. "Transfer," he said. "Tomorrow." Clara nodded. "Good." They spent the day small. Bread, water, a walk around the block. Gideon did not let the street close behind them. At dusk, a woman approached with a basket. "For the boy," she said, not meeting Clara's eyes. "Thank you," Clara said. The woman hesitated. "I should have spoken." Clara met her gaze. "You are." The woman left lighter than she came. That night, Gideon did not take the chair. He sat on the floor, back to the wall, boots off. Clara slept and dreamed of water that did not hide. The next morning the wagon rolled. Chains sang again. The bridge did not see him pass. The river ran on, indifferent and honest. They stood until the dust settled. Then Gideon turned north. "We'll go after the hearing," he he said. Before winter locks the high places. Clara nodded. We'll be ready. The next hearing came fast. More paper, more voices, the same names said without flinching. The judge's gavel found its weight. When it ended, the advocate touched Clara's sleeve. It's enough, he said. Go. They packed light. Gideon sold nothing that mattered and bought what did. He cut Jonah's hair himself, careful and quiet. The seamstress stitched another blue thread inside the coat. At dawn, they rode. The road took them past fields crusted with frost and into timber that smelled of resin and promise. Gideon set a pace that did not ask permission. By noon, they stopped at a ridge where the Kend fell away wide and clean. Clara dismounted and stood breathing. Here? She asked. Not yet, Gideon said. Soon. A rider appeared on the far road, small as a thought. Gideon watched him pass and disappear. Do you think it's over? Jonah asked. Clara shook her head. I think it's honest now. They rode on. By late afternoon, they reached a place Gideon knew, a cabin he'd left stocked months before, smoke ghosting faint from a chimney he'd sealed right. He helped Clara down and set Jonah inside. The space was spare, clean, waiting. Gideon lit the lamp and set water to boil. He took the brass button from Jonah and hung it on a nail by the door. Why there? Jonah asked. So you see it when you leave, Gideon said, and when you come back. Clara touched the button once. We keep moving? She asked. Gideon looked at the door, the road beyond it, the light thinning on the trees. We wait for the last paper, he said. Then we choose the long north. She nodded. Together. He met her eyes. Yes. The wind pressed the cabin and moved on. The fire caught. Outside, the first star showed itself, patient and exact. Gideon asked the question that did not let go, the one that would open what came next. When the final paper names him guilty, he said, will you let me carry Jonah's name too, out loud, so no one ever drags him again? Clara did not answer at once. She stood by the door where the brass button caught lamplight and learned how to be a compass. Jonah watched her face, then Gideon's, waiting for the shape of the world to settle. If you carry his name, she said, you carry his trouble. Gideon nodded. I've carried worse. She turned the button once between her fingers. The wolf's head shone dull and patient. Names can be taken, she said. They can be twisted. They can also be kept, Gideon said. Jonah shifted his weight. Would it change my name? He asked. No, Clara said quickly. It would keep it. Jonah considered this. Okay. They slept light. The wind argued with the eaves and lost. At dawn, Gideon saddled the horse and set off alone, riding down into town while the day was still thin enough to be honest. Clara watched from the doorway until the trees took him. She fed Jonah porridge and listened to the quiet do its work. By noon, the road spoke. Hooves, one set, then another. Gideon returned with a paper folded careful in his coat and a bruise blooming at his cheek like a late thought. They tried, he said, not explaining. Clara did not ask. Did you get it? He handed her the paper. The seal sat straight. The words were spare and heavy. Guilty named. Transfer ordered. Protection extended. Clara read it once, twice. She set it on the table and put her hand over it, grounding it like a pot that wanted to tip. "It's finished," Jonah said. "It's placed," Gideon said. They moved that afternoon, packing what mattered and leaving what did not. Gideon banked the fire and closed the door like it might be opened again. The road north took them through timber that thinned into sky. Snow crusted and broke under the horses' weight. At a bend where the land fell away, they met the advocate riding south, hat low. He pulled up and handed Gideon a small packet. "For travel," he said, "and for witness." Gideon nodded. "You did right." The advocate looked at Clara. "So did you." They rode on. By evening they reached a settlement that wore its law plainly. Post, school, a church that kept its doors open without asking. Gideon reined in. "Here," he said, "if we're doing it." Clara's breath came shallow and then evened. "Now," she said. The clerk was young and careful. He read the paper twice, then looked up. "This binds you," he said to Gideon, "as guardian, as name." "I know," Gideon said. Clara stepped forward. "He keeps his name," she said. "Add yours after it." The clerk nodded and set the ink. Gideon wrote steady. Clara signed. Jonah watched the pen like it might jump. When it was done, the clerk stamped once. The sound was small. It rang anyway. Outside, dusk settled. Gideon knelt to Jonah and met his eyes. "Say it if you want," he said. Jonah tried the shape. He smiled, a small, serious smile. "Jonah Whitlock Cross," he said. Clara's throat tightened. Gideon bowed his head once like a man marking ground. "I didn't know relief could hurt." They took a room near the square and ate stew that tasted like salt and thyme. Gideon took the chair by the window again, habit holding until he let it go. In the night, a knock came. Not hard. The deputy from the old town stood there, hat in hand, snow on his shoulders. "I came to say it's done," he said. "They won't trouble you." Gideon studied him. "Why tell us?" "Because I learned something," the deputy said. He glanced at Jonah. "Names matter." He left lighter than he came. Morning broke clear. Clara packed and set the paper in her coat where it warmed. Jonah traced the wolf's head once and tucked it back. They rode north until the road turned to a suggestion, and then to nothing at all. The land widened. The river ran silver and kept its counsel. Gideon chose a place where sun and wind argued fair and won. They built slow. Gideon cut and set. Clara cooked and stitched. Jonah learned knots and listened. The cabin rose with patience. Gideon hung the brass button by the door again, this time on the inside. Weeks passed. Snow came and went. A letter arrived with the final mark, the last paper that made the world catch up. Gideon read it by the fire and handed it to Clara. "It names him," he said. She read and nodded. "It names us," she said. They did not celebrate. They worked. They rested. They learned the sound of each other's breath. One evening near Christmas, Clara set a small manger on the shelf, unfinished. The child's face a blank curve of wood. Jonah watched her. "Will you carve it?" he asked Gideon. "Together," Gideon said. They did. Chips fell. The fire spoke. Outside, the wind carried a hymn from somewhere it had no right to be. When it was done, Jonah set the figure in place. He looked at it, then at Gideon. "It looks like me," he said, surprised. Gideon smiled without showing teeth. It looks like a beginning. Clara stood at the door and watched the dark settle. She felt the weight leave her shoulders and land where it belonged, in the ground, in the walls, in the keeping. "Stay," she said to Gideon, not asking. "I am," he said. They ate by lamplight. Jonah fell asleep with his boots on. Gideon lifted him and laid him down gentle as weather. Later, Clara and Gideon stood outside and listened to the night prove itself. The river ran. The trees answered. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "You stood." She looked at him. "So did you." The stars showed themselves, exact and unafraid. Gideon took a breath and asked the question that opened the last door without force. "When the snow melts," he said, "will you let this place keep us long enough to call it home?" Clara did not answer him right away. The night had learned their names by then. It said them back in small sounds. The tick of the cooling stove, the hush of snow settling on the roof, the river speaking to itself where it bent and forgot. "Long enough," she said, testing the words. "For what?" "For roots," Gideon said, "not chains." She looked at the cabin, at the door that closed without trapping, at the table worn smooth by work, at the button by the jamb catching lamplight like a patient eye. "I've run my whole life," she said. "I don't want to mistake stillness for safety." Gideon nodded. "I won't ask you to be still, just to stay." Jonah slept with one boot kicked off, breath deep and even. Clara tucked the blanket higher and watched the rise and fall of his chest until her own breath matched it. They slept when the fire gave permission. Morning came with a white quiet that felt earned. Gideon split wood and stacked it true. Clara kneaded dough and set it to rise near the stove. Jonah learned how to read snow, where it broke clean, where it lied. By midday, tracks cut the clearing, one set, then another. Gideon stilled, hand lifting. He listened the way he always did, to the sound beneath the sound. A rider came into view, slow and alone. The advocate dismounted at the edge of the trees and held his hands where they could be seen. "Peace," he called. Gideon stepped out. Clara followed, Jonah between them. The advocate took off his hat. "I brought word," he said, "and paper." He handed Gideon a folded sheet sealed straight. Gideon broke it and read once. He read again. "It's final," Gideon said. Clara felt the last tight place in her chest loosen. "Say it," she asked. "Sentence set," the advocate said. "No return." Jonah exhaled like he'd been holding it since summer. "There's more," the advocate said. "The county will publish. Names will be said." Gideon's eyes lifted. "Good." "They'll look for you," the advocate went on. "Some to thank, some to test." Clara nodded. "We'll choose who we answer." The advocate smiled thinly. "That's the trick." He stayed long enough to share bread and left lighter than he came. The days learned a pattern. Gideon worked the land until it answered. Clara taught Jonah letters by the fire and numbers by the grain sack. She stitched blue thread where it mattered. Gideon carved a second peg for the door and hung the button where it caught the sun at morning. Snow came and went. The river lifted and settled. Christmas passed with a small supper and a quiet hymn Jonah half remembered. No gifts. Enough. In late winter, the knock came again. 3 taps, measured. Gideon opened the door to a woman with wind in her hair and a boy at her side. The boy's coat was thin. His eyes were not. "We heard," the woman said, "about the place that listens." Gideon stepped aside. "Come warm yourselves." They came. Then others, spaced days apart. Not crowds, families. One man with a limp and a saw. A woman with seeds wrapped in cloth. A boy who knew how to set a snare without hurting what he caught. Clara watched the clearing fill and did not flinch. She chose where to say yes and where to say not yet. Gideon backed her without question. "I learned that mercy has edges." Spring pushed. Snow broke. The ground softened. Gideon set posts and showed Jonah how to keep them straight. Clara planted and waited. The river ran loud with thaw. One afternoon, a rider cut the far ridge fast and wrong. Gideon saw it and set his jaw. "Inside," he said. Clara took Jonah's hand and went. Gideon stood his ground. The rider skidded to a stop, dust and slush flying. The deputy from the old town swung down, breath hard. "They're talking," he said. "Men who don't like quiet endings." Gideon nodded. "Let them talk." "They say you stole something," the deputy went on. "A boy." Gideon's voice stayed even. "They're wrong." The deputy swallowed. "I told them." Gideon met his eyes. "Then you did right." The deputy hesitated. "If they come—" "They won't come many," Gideon said, "and they won't come together." The deputy looked past him to the cabin, the smoke, the line of posts. He nodded and rode on. That night, Clara slept light. She dreamed of water that did not hide. The test came at dawn. Two men appeared at the tree line, hats low, hands visible. They did not shout. Gideon walked out to meet them halfway. He did not carry the rifle. "We heard," one said, "about a place that takes in trouble." Gideon waited. "We're not here to start," the man said. "We're here to see." Gideon held the silence until it did its work. "You've seen enough," he said. The men glanced toward the cabin. Clara stood in the doorway, Jonah at her side, the button bright on the jamb. One man tipped his hat. "We have." They left. Spring settled fully. Green found its way into the ground and stayed. Gideon built a second small structure for tools and a third for animals yet to come. Clara learned the land's patience and gave it back. One evening, as light thinned, Gideon set a paper on the table. "What's that?" Jonah asked. "Boundaries," Gideon said. "So everyone knows where listening begins." Clara read it and nodded. "We keep it fair." They signed. They posted it where Sun could find it. A month later, a wagon creaked up with boards and nails paid for by names Clara recognized. She took the list and folded it without reading. "Thank you," she said, to no one in particular. They raised a school corner in the cabin. 2 benches, a slate, a shelf for books that arrived slow and dear. Jonah learned to read the long words without fear. I learned how ordinary hope sounds. Summer came with work and dust and laughter most that did not ask permission. Gideon took off his coat more often. Clara's hands grew strong. Jonah grew taller. One afternoon, Clara found Gideon by the river, carving. She watched him finish a line and lift the piece, a small wolf's head, smoothed and honest. "For the door," he said. She nodded. "For inside." They hung it together. That night, under stars that felt earned, Clara stood with Gideon and listened to the land keep them. "You asked about staying," she said. "Yes," he said. She took his hand, steady and warm. "We'll stay," she said, "until staying becomes choosing again." He squeezed once. "That's all I wanted." The wind moved through the grass and left it standing. Somewhere a night bird called and was answered. The last question waited, gentle and exact, opening the final door without hurry. "When they ask what made this place," Gideon said, "will you tell them it was a rope that broke, or the hands that held after?" Clara watched the river answer him. It took the light and broke it into pieces, then put it back together the way water does, without hurry, without apology. "Both," she said, "but I'll start with the hands." Gideon nodded, as if that had been the only answer he'd been willing to hear. The summer settled into them. Not as ease, exactly, more like a shared weight that fit. The place learned their routines and stopped asking questions. Smoke rose when it was meant to. Doors opened and closed with purpose. The wolf's head by the jam caught the sun in the mornings and the firelight at night, a quiet witness that asked nothing. Jonah grew into the days. He learned where the ground lied and where it told the truth. He learned how to read clouds the way Gideon read men by what they didn't say. Clara taught him letters in the evenings and sums by daylight, and when he stumbled, she waited. Gideon never hurried him. He showed him how to set a fence straight, how to untangle a snare without hurting what it caught, how to stand still long enough for fear to pass. I learned that staying can be an action. Word traveled the way it always does, by accident and need. A family arrived with a wagon that had lost its wheel and its nerve. Gideon fixed the first, and Clara steadied the second. Another came with seed wrapped in cloth and a debt they did not ask to forget. Clara wrote it down and gave it time. Gideon set a post and named a boundary that made sense. They did not take everyone. They took enough. One afternoon, a boy ran in from the river with news in his lungs. "Riders," he said. "One." Gideon stepped out and shaded his eyes. The rider came on slow and alone, hat low, hands clear. When he dismounted, the badge caught the sun. The marshal did not smile. He did not frown. He handed Gideon a paper folded careful. "Final notice," he said. "It's published." Clara read it once. The name sat there, plain and unprotected by rumor. Guilty did not shout. It simply existed. Jonah traced the word with his finger. "Does this mean—" "It means the ground won't forget," Clara said. "And neither will we." The marshal lingered. "There will be people who don't like that," he said. Gideon met his eyes. "They don't have to." The marshal tipped his hat and rode on, the dust settling behind him like an answer that knew where to stop. That night, Clara cooked more than usual. Gideon brought in wood and stacked it high. Jonah swept the floor with a seriousness that made Clara smile and ache at once. They ate by lamplight. Outside, the wind moved through grass and left it standing. After, Gideon took down the paper and set it in the chest with the others. Birth, binding, witness. Clara watched him do it and felt the weight of it land where it belonged. "Will they come?" Jonah asked. "Maybe," Gideon said. "And if they do?" "Then they'll find a place that listens," Clara said. The test did not come as a shout. It came as a question. A man arrived 2 mornings later with a wagon and a face that did not want to be known. He stood at the edge of the clearing and waited. Gideon went to him alone. They spoke low. The man glanced toward the cabin once, then back. "I heard," the man said, "about the boy." "Yes," Gideon said. "I heard you took him." "No," Gideon said. "We kept him." The man nodded, as if that answered something he had been carrying. "I won't trouble you," he said. He turned his wagon and left. Clara watched from the doorway. She did not feel the need to follow. Autumn came the way it always does, by taking without asking and giving back what it can. Leaves burned gold and went. The river thinned. The nights sharpened. One evening near the first frost, Jonah brought the manger figure to the table. He had carved more of the face now, careful and patient. "It needs a name," he said. Clara looked at Gideon. Gideon looked at the figure. "Names matter," Gideon said, "but they don't have to be heavy." Jonah thought. "Call it tomorrow." They set it on the shelf. The knock came late that night. Not hard, not friendly. 3 taps that had learned the measure of doors. Gideon opened it to 2 men and a woman, their coats worn, their hands empty. "We're not here to start," the woman said. "We're here because we heard you finish." Gideon held the door and let the quiet do its work. "Say what you came to say." The woman swallowed. "I watched," she said. "Back then. I didn't speak." Clara stepped forward. The lamplight caught her face, calm and exact. "You are now," she said. The woman nodded, relief breaking her voice. "I am." They did not stay long. They left lighter. Winter tested them properly. Snow came heavy and did not apologize. Gideon cut and hauled. Clara cooked and mended. Jonah learned to split kindling and learned when not to try. One night, the storm came hard enough to make the cabin argue. The roof held. The walls held. The fire held. In the morning, the world lay clean and exact. Gideon went out first and broke the drift. Clara followed and found her breath. At the river, Jonah stopped and looked back at the cabin. "Is this home?" he asked. Clara answered before Gideon could. "Yes." He nodded, satisfied. Spring returned as it always does, by insisting. Green found its way back and stayed. The first calf bawled and was answered. The school corner filled with new hands and new questions. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the listening town. Clara opened it at the table while Gideon sharpened a blade. "It's an invitation," she said. "To what?" Gideon asked. "To tell it," Clara said. "The way it happened." Gideon did not stop sharpening. "Do you want to?" Clara folded the letter. "Yes," she said. "And no." Jonah looked up. "Why both?" "Because telling it matters," Clara said. "And because we don't live there anymore." Gideon nodded. "We'll answer once." They rode down when the pass opened, not hiding, not parading. The town listened differently now. Faces had learned how to be quiet. Clara spoke without raising her voice. She spoke of the rope and the square. She spoke of the hands that cut and the hands that held. She did not dress it. She did not linger. When she finished, the room stayed still. Then someone stood and nodded. Another followed. No applause. No absolution. Enough. They rode back before dusk. At the edge of their land, Gideon reined in and looked at the cabin, the fence, the posts set true. "This is where it stays," he said. Clara took Jonah's hand. "Yes." That night, they sat outside and listened to the land keep them. The stars showed themselves, exact and unafraid. Gideon turned to Clara. "You asked once what would be left," he said. She nodded. "After the rope," he said. She thought of the square, the river, the papers, the hands. "What remains," she said, "is choice." He smiled then, not wide, not for show, enough. Jonah leaned against them, warm and solid. He traced the wolf's head by the door one last time and went inside. The fire burned steady. The wind passed and did not take. And when people asked later what had made the place, Clara told them the truth without hurry. A rope broke, a town listened, and 3 people chose to stay. Not because the world had softened, but because they had learned how to hold. As the fire settles low and the long road grows quiet, this story leaves us with something older than law and stronger than fear. The choice to stand, even when standing costs everything. What Clara, Gideon, and the child built was not a miracle carved from luck, but a home shaped by patience, mercy, and hands that refused to let go. In a hard country, they learned that dignity can be rebuilt one careful day at a time, and that family is sometimes chosen not by blood, but by courage. If this story stirred a memory, a feeling, or a truth you've carried for years, you're not alone. Many of us have walked roads where silence was easier than speaking, and kindness took its time to arrive. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late for justice to find its way, or for a new beginning to take root. If you found comfort here, please take a moment to like this video. It helps others discover these quiet Western stories. Subscribe if you'd like more thoughtful tales of the Old West, told with care and respect. And if you feel moved, leave a comment and tell us the name of the city or town you're listening from. We read every one, and they mean more than you know. Thank you for staying until the end.